And those who watch The Left Hook know about, I think a week and a half ago, Joanne joined me, and we were talking about the mediocracy, and specifically referring to affirmative action for conservative men, and how the world's worst, most terrible, most unqualified white men and a few white women have failed up in the Trump administration. And oh boy, hit dogs holler. And the tears that flowed were enough to fill the nation's cracker barrels. Joy, did you expect nearly 9 days of nonstop headlines and coverage as the economy is tanking, as measles is skyrocketing, as the Epstein scandal is exploding, as Donald Trump's cankles are swollen? Right wing, after Sidney Sweeney and before Cracker Barrel, they filled their grievance for 9 days. I got every day. I got, these Google alerts. New York Post, Daily Mail, Daily Wire. Jesse Waters did a segment on us, and fee fi fo fum how they proved the case because they were so pissed off, and they focused on one segment where you talked about Elvis.
Yeah.
Joanne Reid, you hit a raw nerve. Your response.
It is amazing to me. You texted me on day 8, I think, that we were chatting about this in text, and I'm like, they're still pissed. I was like, let me go look because I'll be honest, MAGA. I really don't pay that much attention to you. I kind of do the coverage, and I cover Trump and everything, but you're whining and crying. I already have children. I raised 3 humans. I'm not going to raise you as well. I'm not your mom. Okay. I don't have to listen to your crying. But then when I went and looked at it, I was actually amazed. I cannot believe they devoted this much time to this. And when you said that term, hit dogs will holler, that is exactly it. Because as many times as I have been called DEI or an affirmative action baby and all that, you know what I never get? Mad. Because I actually am very much in favor of DEI. I don't take that as an insult because I understand that that means that I'm just damn excellent and innovative. And yeah, I am DEI. I'm bringing diversity, and that's bringing something great. You're not insulting me. If you say, "Oh, you're an affirmative action person that got into Harvard," I'm like, "Yeah, I got into Harvard with affirmative action, and Yale, and Brown, and also, Vassar, and the University of Denver, because I was like a great, smart student, and affirmative action means they wanted me." So the bottom line is, if you hear somebody say mediocre white men and you excellent and you are fabulous and you are qualified and you're awesome, you're going to go damn straight because they're not talking about you. If you hear mediocre white men and you freak out, you're telling on yourself.
It was a 9-day freakout, folks, a 9-day freakout, and you went after one of their kings. I'm not talking about John Wayne. I'm not talking about Gary Cooper. I'm not talking about Donald Trump. You went after Elvis. And I think that's very instructive. Why do you think they flipped out over the comment you made about Elvis?
Yeah, and I had all these people being like, "Well, the song that the black lady was singing was written by white men. How about that?" But I think they might have been Jewish. So I don't think that I'm not sure y'all would be excited about that either because they're also considered diversity. Um, I think what it is that Elvis Presley, in a lot of ways, I think epitomizes the success of a cultural appropriation for them, right?
Yes.
For them, for right wingers, for conservatives, they need him to be the king of rock and roll the same way they can't allow Beyonce to be a country music artist
Mm.
because they appropriated these things and now they want to cosplay that they created them. You know what I mean? They own them. They are them. Um, and I think when you prick that bubble, they can't tolerate it. They can't admit it. It would hurt too much to admit that rock and roll was created by black people because that would mean that white people are not the masters of the universe. And there's something about the way that white Americans have been acculturated is to say, who said this the other day? It's the guy who's like a baby Tucker Carlson, who they're not all mad at now. The guy who's the Groiper guy, where he was like trying to insult black people by saying they didn't have written language. Western civilization invented everything. That is what a lot of white Americans believe, that Western civilization invented everything, that nothing was invented by people who aren't white, and that black people and brown people and Muslims and Asians all just should be thankful to be in the presence of white people, But the fact is, lots of different people created lots of different things. Yes, white Americans, white Europeans created lots of interesting and exciting things. So did Africans, so did Chinese people, so did Muslims, so did Arabs. Lots of people created things. But when you are acculturated to believe that only Western Europe
Yeah.
created all the things, you actually can't tolerate the idea that anyone else created anything or that you have just appropriated things. Look at every TikTok dance. A black person does it, a white young lady redoes it, and then she's all of a sudden on, late night. Like she did it. But they
You're not
need
making that up. You're literally not making that up.
to.
I'll never forget. It was it was Buster Rhymes doing that breathless rap when he was joined Chris Brown. I'm forgetting the name of the song, and he was so fast. And then there was a white woman and her husband who did like the same type of rap, and she was really fast. And Ellen DeGeneres brought her on and said, "Wow, you were so
Oh,
good." And I was
yeah.
like, "Well, yeah, she did a really good job, but." It literally was Busta Rhymes who did it, right? And
Literally.
then you also see with rock and roll, even the people, the musicians acknowledge this type of scaffolding approach to civilization, right?
Yeah.
Where we are the beneficiaries of each of our tribes and groups' advances, right? We build upon each other. So, like you mentioned, the Muslims, when literally Europe was in the Dark Ages, folks, it was so bad
Aw.
they called it the Dark Ages.
Yes.
The candle of scientific and intellectual revolution at that time was within Muslim Iraq, Baghdad. It wasn't called Iraq at the time, but modern day Baghdad, and also modern day Spain. You had the Cordova Empire. So we build on each other. And then you had even, Keith Richards. He said, man, no Chuck Berry, no me. You had John Lennon and Paul McCartney saying, we were just trying to copy Chuck Berry. So the foundation of rock and roll music and so much of American culture is rooted in immigrants and Black people. And I think you're absolutely right is it destroys the myth that they keep deluding themselves with of white supremacy, right? Which is also, folks, why they need anti-Semitism, right?
Mm,
How is it possible that a black could have become president? How is it possible that a Joy Reid or a Muslim or an Asian could come to this country and survive? Ah, the replacement theory, the
yeah.
deep state run by the Jews. It's the Jews, you see,
Yeah.
they're so smart. They're so diabolical that they're the head, the nerve center, and they are using the blacks, who are, of course, as we know, are inferior, and the Muslims and the Latinos to replace white folks. I'm not
That's
making this up, folks.
that's their
This
theory.
is part and parcel of the white replacement, the great replacement, the white genocide theory, which is always rooted in anti-Semitism. There's no other way. How the blacks with the different craniums and with the different type of intellectual capabilities based on genetics
You're right.
and IQ, there's no way that a Joy Reid can run circles around us or a Warbalat Ali can run circles without us without DEI.
Right.
And it's the Jews and George Soros who are the ones using these gays and these women and these blacks. That makes
That's it.
sense.
That explains it. And it's a big right. If you go back, like, even to, the 1800s, it was, Europeans looked upon America and they said, "This country has no original culture." It's just, everyone was sort of dressed up like Europeans and trying to mimic European culture and mimic the sort of royalty and sort of court system of Europe and of England. And they were just sort of copycats, right? If you look at the Gilded Age, that's a great show, by the way. Watch the Gilded Age. But you can see the way Americans in the late 18th century were sort of copying Europe and trying to sort of dress like and be like Europeans. They didn't have anything original. It was stated in that era that the first original form of music was considered to be the gospel music out of Tougaloo University. These gospel songs that Black people were singing, and Tougaloo's Glee Club actually traveled to Europe in I think in the 1800s, and the European sort of, intellectual sort of leadership said, "Oh my gosh, America finally has an original form of music." Similar with blues and country music and rock and roll.
Yep.
These are things that enslavement created, right? Because you had these enslaved people who would sing these sort of torch songs to liberty. They would also use some of these gospel songs as liberation anthems when they, as signals to each other if people were running and fleeing the plantations. That morphs into this very original, only in America form of music. That's why gospel, blues, rock and roll, ultimately hip hop. This is the music that came out of the pain of slavery. And then
Mm,
who did Black folks partner with when they created our next original form of music, which was jazz in the early 20th century? The Jews. It was
yeah.
Jewish people and Black people who were both shunned from society, who were the only group of people who were white and Black who could be integrated because they were both out of the main culture, and they got together and said we're together. So yeah, when the song Hound Dog is written, I believe by two Jewish men. You had a lot of Jewish men that were writing the kind of jazz music that Ella Fitzgerald is then singing. And so you had this sort of Jewish Black mashup culture in rock and roll that was considered subversive to the point where Henry Ford tried to ban this music. He believed that jazz and blues were demonic because they came from the Jews and the Blacks. And so Henry Ford, who's one of our greatest inventors, and again, I'm going to give him credit. He was not mediocre in terms of his ability to create the automobile superstructure system, okay? But he was also terrified of this other culture, and he wanted it banned so much that he said we need to create our own form of culture. And basically, they created square dancing as a counter to jazz and blues. They said we need square dancing. Let's try to get every child in America to do that. This square dance, to the point where it became inculcated in our school system, to the point where when I was growing up, we had to learn square dancing at school. And most kids who grew up in my era, I'm Generation X, had to learn square dancing because they were trying to force this to be our culture in contravention to jazz and blues and rock and roll, which they thought was subversive because Jews and Blacks were involved. And so the reality is, America has this fraught history of trying to both co opt Black and brown and Asian culture. Why do we all eat like Taco Bell? Because we want the Mexican food. We just don't want the Mexicans, right? We want the Italian food. But at one time, we didn't want Italians. They weren't even considered white. They were one of
Nope.
the most lynched groups of white people besides white Jewish people, because literally they thought Italians were not actually white. And until they lynched a dozen of them, and the outrage in Italy was so frantic and they were so afraid, they literally created Columbus Day to appease the Italian community and then flipped them into being white. And then said, now you guys can be white. We're going to add you to whiteness. They weren't originally, they used to be in the fields in Louisiana and Mississippi next to the Blacks in the fields. So the
There was
reality,
Irish weren't considered white in this country,
no.
folks. In the 19th century, there were signs that saying "No dogs, no blacks, no Irish." Irish
Oh,
weren't considered white. Italians weren't considered white. Jews still aren't considered white, even though the Jews who think that they're white, nope, they don't consider you white. And I'm talking about the white supremacists and white nationalists. The problem is that many of these Irish and Italians, who, by the way, like you said, belonged with the blacks and the poors, they were able to mainstream into whiteness thanks to the way they appear. Whiteness is a construct that was created in the 18th century in America to separate powerful, wealthy landowners
oh, in the
from the
15th, in
rest of
the
us, right?
16th century, 16th
I
century.
think 16th century, right? So whiteness is a construct, and the Italians and the Irish, they forget their history. You were not considered white, right? Henry Ford was not your friend. And speaking about Henry Ford, the person who brought the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which is a Russian conspiracy at the turn of the 20th century, there was a conspiracy, a bullshit pamphlet that said that, someone saw, they eavesdropped these cabal of Jewish leaders in Russia plotting to take over the world, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, complete fabricated nonsense that fueled anti Semitism in Europe. Guess who mainstreamed it in America, folks? It was Henry
Henry Ford.
Ford who then mass produced that and said,
And he
oh,
was
guys, you got to read
pro-Nazi.
this.
He was pro-Nazi.
And when Donald Trump in his first administration went to Michigan and visited, one of the car assembly lines, he quoted the pro-Nazi, bloodline heritage comment of Henry Ford. That was Stephen Miller writing that comment. It always goes back to racism, folks. And I know people think we're crazy, but I've said before on the show, and I'll say it again: the twin original sins of this country are white supremacy and capitalism,
Yeah.
racism and greed. And the avatar of racism, greed, cruelty, misogyny, white mediocrity, celebrity, fame, failing up in life is Donald Trump. The avatar of all of our sins that is destroying our country from within is Donald Trump. Now with his two cankles, now the fact that he's sick, I don't think he's going to last long, Joy. I've said it before,
And
I'll say it again.
what is it? Yeah.
I think, it's congestive heart failure. It reminds me of when my grandmother had. He doesn't look right. He looks blotchy. His face is drooping. And that's why they're marching towards authoritarianism. And the way they're doing it is to cultural rage and cultural grievance.
Yes.
Since we've talked, literally hit dogs holler. Literally, they're proving our own thesis. As the country's falling apart, Your comments on Cracker Barrel.
First of all, I'm very uncomfortable with the name that it's called Cracker Barrel, and I don't know why it's called Cracker Barrel. I've never understood it. They used to have a lot of racism in there, and used to be a little off to try to go in Cracker Barrel as a black person. So it's a little weird for me. But look, if they want to change their logo, change their logo. The flip out by the right over the fact that there's not going to be a black man next to the barrel anymore, it again shows what's wrong with y'all.
The white man next to the barrel.
Is he white or black? Oh, okay, I thought
White,
it was a black man. It was a white man. Oh, okay. Well, then why y'all even mad? It's not even a black. It's not even like Aunt Jemima. Like,
because
if
they
you want to wait, it's
replaced
black
the
man.
white man. The white man is now gone, and the
It's
barrel is now
bad.
gone.
What? They're mad
Yeah.
because the white man ain't next. It's a white man by the barrel.
Yeah,
What the-
and then they had to bring him back 2 days ago. Cracker Barrel's like, whoa, 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 okay, because MAGA was boycotting their favorite restaurant apparently, where Byron Donalds, who calls Donald Trump his daddy, found Jesus. Not making up, that was a tweet. He found Jesus in the
At a
Byron Donalds found Jesus in the parking lot of a Cracker Barrel. Folks,
What are they,
listen,
12? What are you, a baby? What's wrong with y'all? I feel like you guys, do you not understand you can't afford your rent? You can't afford your rent. Your gas is going through the roof. Y'all farms are gonna go out of business because there's no more USAID. He's destroying the economy, and y'all worried about the man next to the barrel. Do you really have this much time on your hands? Y'all must be real rich. And the reality too of the mediocrity piece, to go back to it just for a moment,
yeah, please.
the the reason that white supremacy defends mediocrity among white people is because the goal is to say to black, brown, Muslim, Asian, other people, no matter how outstanding you are, the most mediocre, unschooled white man is better than you, has more rights than you, and is more of a citizen than you. But what that does to white people is it dampens even their drive for excellence. You're actually hurting yourself because what you're saying is you don't even have to be excellent to get these jobs. You can just be Pete Hegseth and be the Secretary of Defense and replace
Yep.
a black four-star general because in white supremacy, a TV host from Fox is better than a black four-star general, and the black four-star general is by definition a quote unquote DEI hire and is not qualified. Lisa Cook at the Fed is a criminal, and she's called that by a literal criminal, Donald Trump, but she has to be a criminal. He's not going to go after the white guy at the top. He's going to go after Lisa Cook and make up some sort of crimey thing against her because he's a criminal. But she's got to go because she's inherently unqualified because she's a black woman. They only are going they literally have gone into the military history of the United States and deleted the black people. They had to put Jackie Robinson back, but they've even edited what they've put back because they cannot allow young white men to lionize a black person. There can't be black heroes. Heroes must be white and male, period. Yes, and Lisa Cook is suing, and she should. Heroes must be white and male. Otherwise, what else do you tell young white kids that you're also telling not to go to college, right? They are telling white men and women, don't go to college. College is a scam. And they're also telling them you're better than every college educated black man. You'll get more opportunity than every college educated white man, or we'll just put you in ICE and you can beat the hell out of every brown person you see. This country has a history of desiring the labor of non-white people. We brought Chinese men over to build the railroads, but we didn't want Chinese women to come with them. So because we didn't want them to produce more Chinese people. We didn't want the Chinese population, but we wanted their labor. We wanted Puerto Rico so we could have their cheap labor, but we didn't want them to be full citizens or to have a state. We want the labor of blacks, but we don't want them to be president, CEO of a company. We don't want them to be news anchors. We just want your labor. Everyone who isn't white, we want your labor, but not you, right? We didn't mind Indian immigrants coming in and boosting Silicon Valley, but don't try to stay and have more Indians. Don't try to be here and make more brown people because now we don't want your ass. Get out. We just want you to work here and leave. And Trump signaled this when he said, we're going to take care of our farmers. We're going to make sure they own their laborers. They want back indentured servitude. What
There you go.
people like Trump and his billionaire friends want is the system they had at the start, where if you weren't a white landowning rich man, and I mean poor whites didn't get nothing either. If you
Nope.
weren't a rich landowning white man, you were a non-citizen. You were a laborer. You were a cog in the wheel. And what I would say to white folks, don't get mad at me and Wajahat for pointing out the mediocrity. Fight the mediocrity because it's your enemy too. Because number one, they're telling your children not to go to college. They're telling your children they don't have to be excellent to get opportunity. Then they will be unprepared and ill prepared when they do get opportunities. The guy from the real world Boston is not good at running transportation, but they've told him all you need to do is be a white man, bro. Just get in there and you can do this. They told Donald Trump, you're good at being president. You're a white man. They're telling themselves lies that are destroying their own lives, their own businesses, and their own country.
Amen. Preach. And I give you RFK Jr. killing our nation's children. RFK Jr. right now, and thank God there's a woman standing up to him and saying, no, I won't resign. A qualified woman, Dr. Erica McAnterfer, who's the commissioner of BLS. Donald Trump didn't like the reports that made him look mediocre. So what did he do? He replaced her with a Nazi living unqualified man, EJ Antoni. You look at Pete Hegseth, completely unqualified, but he's a reek who scrubs the military of the DI accomplishments, not just Jackie Robinson, not just Tuskegee Airmen, not just literally the erasure of transgender people, but the Navajo code talkers. Because,
Yes.
folks, the only person who saved America, restored America, redeemed America, makes America great is white men, which is why, as he erased those names and tried to erase those names, he brought back Confederate white
Yeah.
men to
That's
name the buildings and the bridges and the statues and the
right.
forts. These racist traitors, I always want to remind people, who
Traitors.
lost a war.
That's
In
right.
order for me
Losers.
and Joy to get a statue named after us, we would have to create statues. That is mediocrity, right? The fact that these were racist slavers who lost the war, Pete Hegseth and all these mediocre white men who cry over Cracker Barrel like that's our hero.
Yeah.
We're gonna bring those names back in. We're gonna scrub the women and the blacks. We're gonna remove the Smithsonian exhibit of all the history that makes us uncomfortable because of our fragile feelings. And we want to feel great again, even if it comes at the expense of Americans losing their health care, Americans losing their jobs, of immigrants not coming to America, not spending their money, of
Yeah.
people literally being sick, being tired, dying earlier, dying sooner. And then because of the lack of opportunities, because of poverty, because of drugs and fentanyl, guess where they're going to go, folks? 80% of incarcerated people in America are poor. And
Yeah.
what is the company that just stock skyrocketed on election night? Private prisons. And guess what? Detention centers are being built. Prisons are being built. That belly has to be filled. It's going to be not just black and brown bodies, but poor whites are going to fill the belly of those private detention centers, and
Yeah.
the rich are going to get richer. Everyone else is going to get poorer, and they're going to have their indentured servitude in the form of free, imprisoned,
Slave labor.
incarcerated labor.
Yeah.
It's
That's our
happening
new
right in
business.
front of your face.
That's our new business. The biggest job, sort of job creator at this moment is ICE. And remember that the reason that we have police, right? The original police force were slave catchers. And what they would
With
do is they
guns,
take poor whites, right? They would say, you poor whites, we're not going to give you opportunity or money or land, but you go catch those slaves and we'll give you a bounty. And then that morphed into the quote unquote the whites who are not wanted. Italians and Irish proliferated in the police force, particularly Irish, because they themselves were considered a second tier class. But
yep,
they pushed them into this field in which they could brutalize Black people. Policing was literally made to keep track of, track, detain, arrest, and chase Black people. And they were like, we will let Irish people do it because we don't want to do it. We don't want to deal with them. And they themselves were an underclass. The same with Italians. They said, now we're going to push you and make you the underclass that will police the Blacks. It was always created to protect rich white people from all of the rest of us. Now, what they're doing, you see a lot of these ICE agents with their faces covered. Some of them are speaking Spanish like real, authentically. Some of them are Latino. They have tricked a lot of Latinos into believing it's their turn to become white. And they think they can now buy themselves into whiteness by being against even their own family members, even their own cousins, even the people who look just like them who are trying to come in too. And now they're finding out the leopards are eating their face because they were singing, "I will vote, ding, 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 for Donald Trump." And then Trump said, "Yeah, I don't like y'all neither. You're brown, get out." Because the reality is, they can't make the math work to maintain the white majority in the country. 2045 is coming, and you can't, they think they can deport and detain and incarcerate enough brown people. And where are you going to get your numbers? The biggest groups of people with that asylum free pass to stay are Venezuelans and Cubans. So you need numbers. They can't get enough numbers with Mexican Americans because 75% or more of Mexican Americans are born here. We
Yeah.
took over Mexico. These people are not immigrants. They're Americans. They just are happen to be Mexican American. So they can't get the numbers with them. They're looking for hard numbers, and they're going after Cubans and Venezuelans. They don't give a damn that y'all voted for Trump. Haitians too. Y'all voting for Trump in Florida? They don't care about you. They need numbers. And so they're going to grab as many brown and black people as possible. And to your point, Watch, incarcerate them in private prisons, use them for free labor. And that is our new industry. A sane country would look at this incredible young, diverse workforce. The youngest people in the country are immigrants, Asian people and black people. Well, actually, not even black people, brown people are the youngest. I would look at this workforce and say, how do I build up a super economy with this incredible, motivated workforce that wants to work, that wants to achieve? And let me see how I can build a great economy on that. But these people are like, I don't want that because I hate those people. I would rather destroy the country to stop those people from having full citizenship and rights.
I would rather die than share the home with Joy or Watch. You have a hard out. I want to get you out, but I had to ask you this. We're speaking about model minorities, and model minorities eventually become the enforcers of white supremacy. Chickens for Colonel Sanders. All of our communities have them, folks. And by the way, speaking about the mediocrity, Janine Pirro, who's now U.S. attorney, in order to crack down on crime in here in D.C., she has allowed people to wait for it. Speaking about law enforcement and the ability to carry guns to terrorize black people in D.C., you can carry long arms. Huh. I
What?
wonder why. But I have to ask you about this before I let you go. Speaking about the model minorities, um, Apac Shakur and Richie Torres revealing his ass on Adam Friedland's podcast. I don't know if you followed the news. I'm talking about Hakeem Jeffries being called out as Apac Shakur by Charlemagne the God, and Richie Torres's what should be a career-ending interview on Adam Friedland's podcast yesterday, where Adam tried for an hour, like literally an hour, to get him to be empathetic towards Palestinians, and Richie was a robot who just repeated Apac talking points.
I have not seen the interview. I will have to check it out, but that is par for the course for Richie Torres. I try not. I will try to watch as little of him as possible because it's hard for me to tolerate a black man. As a black man, you should be as attentive as anyone else, if not more so, to the ideas of apartheid and oppression. And the fact that you are siding with the people who are oppressing a group of people who should be your natural allies, who've always been the natural allies of black people, going back to SNCC, black folks have been empathetic to Palestinians. I myself, I tell people I've had the same opinion since seventh grade when I first really sort of got hip to what was happening to Palestinian people. So I didn't get on this for clicks like a lot of people on the right might be doing. And the reality is, I empathize because I know what apartheid is. My family lived on the continent. My father lived and worked in South Africa most of his career. I know exactly what apartheid is. I know it when I see it. I know wrong when I see it. And Richie Torres should be ashamed of himself. And I'm very sad about Hakeem Jeffries being involved in this because the reality is not all money is good money. AIPAC should be a foreign lobby. They are not lobbying for the United States. They're lobbying for a foreign country, and not just any foreign country, a foreign country whose prime minister is a literal war criminal, whose secretary of defense is a literal war criminal, who've said and bragged that they're going to starve the Palestinians and they're going to destroy them like the Amalek. They use the Bible. They've perverted biblical scriptures in order to justify a genocide. It's a clear genocide. Anyone who with eyes can see that it's a genocide. Richie Torres.
I lost your voice.
I'm. Oh,
I said
hold
Richie.
on.
I got you
Someone
now.
tried
You
to
said
call me.
Richie
Yeah.
Torres.
No,
Yeah.
I'm embarrassed for Richie Torres. I'm embarrassed for him as a black person. I think that he should think twice before embracing cruelty and mass death. And I'm on the side of living and on the side of life. And I'm on the side of the Palestinian people. And I said this on my show the other day. we don't claim that because the Irgun and the Stern Gang were literally doing terrorism in Palestine when it was called Mandatory Palestine, blowing up buildings belonging to the British, assassinating Lord Moyne, blowing up railways, killing 100 people in the Deir Yassin massacre. We don't say that because terrorism was there before even Israel's founding, and then two people, one who was in the Irgun as a young man and one who was in the Stern Gang, Yitzhak Shamir and Menachem Begin, we don't say that we would have justified Britain carpet bombing Tel Aviv and carpet bombing Jerusalem at that time. We wouldn't have given Britain a free pass if they bombed every school, every kibbutz, every hospital, killed every journalist that they saw, and said there were, that there were Irgun and Stern Gang cameras. Therefore, we had to blow up some a cameraman or a journalist. If Britain had just done that to those people, because they literally had terrorism in the 1930s and 40s, they killed Lord Moyne in 1946. We would have said that Britain was committing genocide. We would have
Yep.
said that it was unacceptable, and we would have named whatever prime minister of Britain did that, we would have said they were a war criminal. So the idea that we can now say that because Hamas didn't act on October 7, 2023, Israel may now kill every man, woman, and child in Gaza. They may kill every reporter, every doctor, every surgeon, call them all Hamas. They should be able to wipe them off the face of the earth. You can't justify that. That is just unjustifiable. And that they can also that a person can get off of a plane from Cleveland, Ohio, or Warsaw, Poland, or Moscow, land in Tel Aviv, ride out to the West Bank, walk into somebody's home and say, "This is mine because God said it's mine." We would say, if I did that in the Congo, and my daddy was literally from the Congo, you would say I was out of my mind. If I showed up in Ghana, where my mother's ancestors were enslaved, were stolen from slavery, but I went and said, "Honey, I'm home. I'm back. This farm is now mine. God said it's mine. There's something in the scriptures I can find that said it's mine, and I'm taking it. Get the hell out." If I did that, you would think I was insane. Every colonizer has said God said I could do it. Every group, from the Pilgrims to the people who colonized South Africa, they all say God said I could do it. They all say it. So why are we saying in this one instance we are allowing that, and we don't actually believe that it's wrong? What's happening in the West Bank is wrong. It's apartheid. It's theft. You're taking people's farms and homes. You're shooting and killing them with the police standing there. That's wrong. What's happening in Gaza is just wrong. And I'm sorry. I know it's unpopular. It's in the mainstream media to say it's wrong. It's wrong. And the
And,
last thing I'll say
and it's
about
a
that,
genocide.
it's a genocide. And the worst part of it is two parts. One, Bibi Netanyahu daring to use my faith, Christianity, to fool American Christians into going along with it. You saw that Ted Cruz interview with Tucker Carlson, perverting Christianity to justify genocide. And then second thing is perverting Judaism to justify it. And then claiming that being against genocide is anti-Semitic. You are making a mockery of the Jewish faith if you say this is what the Jewish faith is about. I know a lot of people who are of the Jewish faith. I don't know one who believes that genocide is a part of it. Everyone I know who is Jewish says that their religion, and also the pain of their ancestors from in World War II, is being mocked by this, is being subverted by this, is being used to justify wrong. You should not use people's faith and people's pain and people's experiences to justify wrong. It is wrong, it is evil, and it needs to stop. And we need to stop paying for it. Richie Torres, you should be ashamed of yourself.
It is a genocide happening in real time, and we have the power and the ability as the United States of America to turn off the tap and tell Israel enough is enough. You have to be pro-Palestinian, pro-human, anti-fascism, anti-occupation, anti-genocide. There is more of us than there are of them, folks, as they try to rewrite history and literally gaslight us to our faces. We have to say enough is enough. And thankfully, we have truth tellers like Joanne Reid. I kept her 8 minutes after I was supposed to let her go, but she was cooking, folks. Joanne, shamelessly promote yourself.
Let me invite you all to please follow me here on Substack. I love my Substack family. You can follow me at joyannreid.com. And you can follow me also if you would subscribe to my YouTube channel, please. It is thejoyreidshow.com and spell Reid, REID, thejoyreidshow.com. Subscribe to my channel. We're trying to get to 1 million subscribers by my birthday in December. So help me get there.
Subscribe to Joanne. Thank you so much, Joanne. I appreciate it, folks. This the 1,700 people who joined us a bit late. Joanne respond to all the haters, the crocodile tears, the crackle bearers of tears of MAGA, based on our previous conversation, and then also dropped a message, a note, if you will, to Apac Shakur, Hakeem Jeffries, and Richie Torres. This is the left hook. Folks, stay on. Joy, I'll let you go. Thank you so much. I'm
Thank
bringing
you,
on
Bob.
investigative reporter Vicky Ward right now, who has been following the Epstein story for 2 decades. And she was the one who actually wrote the story about the Farmer sisters, one of the victims of Jeffrey Epstein. But when Vicky first wrote it about 20 years ago in the Vanity Fair, Jeffrey Epstein threatened Vicky, who was pregnant at the time with kids, threatened Vanity Fair. And then all mentions of the victims, the Farmer sisters, were completely removed. Vicky, I was just telling people about your background and your history. Joanne Reid was on. We have 1,700 people. I decided instead of doing a brand new one, I'm just going to keep it rolling. So Vicky Ward is the investigative reporter. I was telling people about how you tried over 20 years ago to tell the world about Jeffrey Epstein, the pedophile, how the Farmer sisters reached out to you, how you included their on the record testimony about how they were abused, not just by Jeffrey Epstein, folks. It's very important. Ghislaine Maxwell, not just Jeffrey Epstein, but Ghislaine Maxwell, who stalked them, groomed them, and also, according to the Farmer sister, uh, also raped them. Virginia Giuffre also said that Ghislaine Maxwell, who was the one who spotted her at Mar-a-Lago, she trusted Ghislaine Maxwell. She's polished. She's a woman. She said, "Trust me. Oh, I'll go work for Jeffrey Epstein. He's a great guy." And along with Jeffrey, she also molested this girl, Virginia Giuffre, who died by suicide in April. And I've had Vicky on twice before. Vicky's been following the stories for a while. She sat there through Ghislaine Maxwell's entire trial. She came out with an audiobook called Chasing Gazelle. And she also, Vicky, is the best-selling author of a really great book that came out last month, The Idaho Four, which she co-wrote with James Patterson, An American Tragedy. And that is about how a young white man was radicalized towards violence. Oh, that happens a lot. And the tragedy in Idaho, this incel movement. But I brought her because it's been a while since I've talked to her about all the latest developments on the Epstein case. And I want to keep the focus, Vicky, on the Epstein scandal that Donald Trump is desperately, desperately, desperately trying to distract us from. But it ain't working. Vicky, I'm sure you saw the transcripts. I'm sure you heard of James Comer asking for more information. Your take on what was revealed in the transcripts of the conversation between Ghislaine Maxwell and Todd Blanche, who, by the way, was not the prosecutor. That was Maureen Comey. She was fired. And Todd Blanche is the Deputy Attorney General, also previously Donald Trump's attorney. It is very unusual for a Deputy Attorney General to leave his office, fly all the way to Florida, sit for 2 days with Ghislaine Maxwell, and then less than a week later, Ghislaine Maxwell, Vicky, was somehow magically, no one knows why, transferred to a minimum security camp in Texas. I yield the floor to you, Vicky.
Thank you, Wash. So I've been taking a few days to do this properly, to really go through those transcripts of those 2-day interviews between Todd Blanche and Ghislaine Maxwell, because hopefully I should be able to, publish my newsletter on this in the next 24 hours. But I think that given that I have made a podcast series about Ghislaine Maxwell, and I do know her, it might be worthwhile for people to read it. So look, I mean, you and I talk, Watch. I think that I did think that there could be some value in interviewing Ghislaine Maxwell, problematic, deeply problematic as that is for what it says about our system of justice and the clear quid pro quo that seems to have happened, giving her, transferring her to a club fed for having agreed to talk to a man who was the president's personal attorney with a condition of immunity. But I had hope from a journalistic perspective that she would and could provide answers about the deep state, which is what Trump's base is all riled up about when it comes to Epstein, with some justification. Why is it that this guy evaded justice for so long? Who were the people that he knew? How did influence get wielded? Whose money was funding him? The soft power network, all of that. The problem is that what she said raised more questions than it answered, right? I mean, first of all, she absolutely brilliantly reframed the entire conversation, not as if this was a convicted felon, convicted of really horrendous sex crimes against her own gender, children. This was a sophisticated, educated, privileged woman who got young girls to trust her to bring, precisely because of her background and her gender, to then bring them into Epstein's orbit. So, what she has been convicted of is particularly heinous, but she managed to reframe this conversation as if she was sitting at somewhere like Buckingham Palace, and she reminded Todd Blanche the entire time of her sort of elevated status, her upper class background, the fact that she'd born into a one-time grand, rich, powerful family. And he never once corrected her. And if you just listen to the audio, you'd think that here was this plummy-voiced woman. They could be sitting at Downton Abbey, and she told this woe is me narrative about how after her father died, and her father, by the way, who was a crook, who, let's not forget, stole the equivalent of $1 billion today from the pension funds of his employees. This was discovered after he was found dead, floating in the water around his magnificent yacht. She kicked off by reminding Todd Blanche, and implicitly, I'm sure, President Trump, who knew her father, of how, in her eyes, what a great man, an interesting man her father had been, how he had not been, she said, attached to money, how he had been. She said, no, he wasn't attached to money, other than, she said, obviously, there was a plane and a yacht. and Todd Blanche.
I mean, which one of us doesn't have a yacht and a plane and $1 billion, Vicky? Come on.
Well, and so, and on she rolls, and you would think, listening to her, that this was all, that what had happened to her was some dreadful misunderstanding based on the fact that people don't really understand how the British upper classes live today and the dreadful social pressures that had been on her after her father died and there was no money, and how vulnerable she'd been to Jeffrey Epstein, on and on. It was really remarkable. And what was really remarkable was that Todd Blanche let it roll uninterrupted. However, when he got to the thorny questions of how did Jeffrey Epstein make his money? Was he working for intelligence? Did he blackmail his clients? Her answers were extraordinary. They were fantastical. She went into some long story about El Chapo. And she said, she likened it to, she understood it, that Epstein had told her that if El Chapo had money stolen by a rival drugs cartel, then Epstein would have offered his services to go and recover the stolen money, but he would have, instead of returning all the money, taken a percentage of it as his payment. And she said that she described herself, by the way, as being both sophisticated and not terribly sophisticated in understanding quote unquote business. This is the daughter of, one of the one time most powerful magnates in the world. And when asked, so she said, this is what Jeffrey Epstein told her that he did before she met him. And then when Todd Blanche said, so what did he then do for men like Leslie Wexner and Leon Black? She said it was something similar, which again just raises more questions. So does Les Wexner and Leon Black, do they want to go before Congress and explain who was stealing money from them and why they needed Jeffrey Epstein to go and retrieve it and take a flat fee? I mean, I think Ron Wyden, Senator Ron Wyden, who has been
following the
looking,
money.
yes, will also be going through this transcript like me with a fine tooth comb.
Can you, Vicky, for what's common to us isn't common to other people, just so the names that you dropped are big names. Leslie Wexner, CEO of Victoria's Secret, billionaire, a man who gifted, and no one knows to this day why, Jeffrey Epstein for $0, gifted him the plum jewel of Manhattan real estate, his $77 million townhouse. He gave to Jeffrey Epstein, folks, for free, as one does. And then also, he told Jeffrey Epstein, you know what? You get power of attorney over in my entire estate. No one to this day has asked why Leslie Wexner, who's a very intelligent man, who's still very much alive, gave Jeffrey Epstein his $77 million townhouse and power of attorney. And then Leon Black is another billionaire who is the co-founder of Apollo Global Management. And we still don't know why Leon Black, a billionaire, allowed this guy who has no real discernible talent, was a college dropout, access to so much wealth. But continue, just to connect the dots for people who don't know, Vicky.
Well, and you would have thought, I mean, that would have been a great question for Todd Blanche to have asked Ghislaine Maxwell. Well, why on earth do you think Leslie Wexner gave Jeffrey Epstein power of attorney? He didn't go that far. But the other thing that's important to remember about Leslie Wexner is that after Jeffrey Epstein died, Wexner publicly said that he had severed ties from Epstein 10 years or so previously because Epstein had stolen $60 million from him. Again, this would have been something that Todd Blanche could have asked Ghislaine Maxwell about. But
no curiosity, though. None.
But he didn't go there. And she kind of cut him off by sort of saying, I've read these reports that Jeffrey Epstein was a grifter, but I don't know anything about that. She gave us no insight at all into why Alex Acosta, then back in the day, the U.S. attorney in Miami, did this extraordinary plea deal with Jeffrey Epstein, whereby he evaded federal charges and got a cushy slap on the wrist, went to prison for a year, barely, except, pleading guilty to state charges. In her telling, she knew nothing about it and she wasn't questioned. I mean, it was as if she was living in a parallel universe, except that she was still on Jeffrey Epstein's payroll. I mean, that was another thing where her memory was extraordinarily selective. And again, Todd Blanche was so derelict in his duties. She said that she was paid $250,000 a year salary by Jeffrey Epstein. And then even when she had left his universe, he continued to pay her. And even when he went to jail in 2009, he continued to pay her, except she didn't really understand why he was going to jail and had no knowledge or any of this. So when Todd Blanche said, so what was the $30 million that was mentioned in your criminal trial? What was that for? Well, then she had some extraordinary story as to how Jeffrey Epstein was sort of putting money into entities that bore her name, but to pay for the helicopter that she flew, but it wasn't really her money. I mean, and so we were asked to accept all of that. Then then we got to the question of intelligence. She said that, yes, her father had worked, she said, for British intelligence. That is I suspect true. It's well documented, but it only tells a fraction of the story. Robert Maxwell was a double, if not triple, agent, and that and is buried in Israel on the Mount of Olives. Olives. That's not normal if you're only a British intelligence agent. That's something that the Israelis do for somebody that they consider a national hero. And it's well documented, and I've reported this in Chasing Ghislaine, that Robert Maxwell was very involved in moving money around in Iran-Contra and the Iraq-Iran war, shuffling money between Middle Eastern countries and the Eastern Bloc and the British and the Americans. When she was then, she was very quick to say she'd no idea about Jeffrey Epstein's ties to intelligence. She doubted it because she thought he would have bragged about it if it had been true. Well, again, this completely flies in the face of what I've reported on this, which is I've never suggested, and I don't think anybody has, that Jeffrey Epstein was on the payroll of an intelligence agency for any country. What has been suggested is that somebody like him, who's running the money for the wealthiest Zionist, Leslie Wexner, is the richest supporter of Israel in America. And Jeffrey Epstein was the guy not just running his money in terms of generating more wealth for Les Wexner, but in distributing his money philanthropically. So Jeffrey Epstein was the guy who was the conduit to all the academics at Harvard. Jeffrey Epstein was the conduit between the Clinton White House and Leslie Wexner at a time when Bill Clinton, there was sort of pressure on him to maybe side with the Gulf states against Israel back at that time. So this is what we call wielding influence in the intelligence space. This is a man who has access to the deepest pockets, who have interests in different countries. And it means that Jeffrey Epstein is able to wield a lot of power. We also know that he was very close to the leaders of African countries. He was Mohammed bin Salman, now the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, was a guest in his home. In the last 4 years of his life, he talked about having Vladimir Putin as a client. So, again, Ghislaine Maxwell's amnesia and easy rejection of the idea that he could have worked for intelligence kind of completely defies the very complexity of what many people think Jeffrey Epstein was.
And also, can we just remind people that Ehud Barak, who's the former prime minister of Israel, also the former head of the IDF, trained in intelligence, visited Jeffrey Epstein numerous times at his New York townhouse. And I'm just curious, Vicky, why would Ehud Barak, I don't know, visit Jeffrey Epstein, this reclusive pedophile billionaire, numerous times if Jeffrey Epstein was not in some way, shape, or form being used by foreign intelligence countries as an asset? And also Alex Acosta, who was the U.S. attorney who gave Jeffrey Epstein that sweetheart deal in 2008 and later became the labor secretary for Donald Trump. And by the way, still very much alive. I'd love to hear from him. I believe it was the Wall Street Journal. It was not a flaming liberal outlet, but it was the Wall Street Journal that reported when he was asked by so many people, how or why could you have given this pedophile, where there's several victims came out in 2008 and said he's a pedophile, an unheard of sweetheart deal that essentially let him commit pedophilia and rape girls while he was, out of prison for a majority of the time during that 1-year sentence. And he said he was told that Epstein was intelligence. And we still don't know more about that.
No, I mean, it's really, I mean, I'm hoping, I think I read, Rog, that Alex Acosta has been asked to come before Congress because, really at this point, um, sound like a character from Star Wars. He's my only hope. he would tell the,
The fact that Alex Acosta is our only hope means the rebellion is doomed, Vicky.
yes. So, yeah. So anyway, I've been going through the Maxwell transcripts, and I mean, it's just, it's really shocking. And there's one point, Woj, where the snobbery, uh, I grew up in England. I understand the world that she comes from, but the snobbery with which she describes Virginia Roberts, now sad, who took her own life, had, the most clearly, terrible struggles as a young woman, before she got to Jeffrey Epstein's home, in Jeffrey Epstein's home, and then but then had the courage to take on the establishment and stand up against Epstein, Maxwell, Prince Andrew, all of them. I mean, and Ghislaine talks about this woman as, she says to Todd Blanche, so, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit, oh, well, she fell into drugs. And I mean, you must know, how unreliable people and, who are involved in drugs are. I see a lot of them in Tallahassee, as if no, she's not discussing that the Tallahassee she's in is, is a prison. I mean, the entitlement was so jarring, and Todd Blanche never called her on it. It was horrendous, actually. Really,
And
really horrendous.
And Virginia Giuffre, I think I'm glad you're talking about her because we have to focus it on the victims. Virginia Giuffre was a teenager who was employed at Mar-a-Lago. She was a spa attendant because her father used to manage properties for Donald Trump. And Ghislaine Maxwell, who was visiting Mar-a-Lago, saw this young woman allegedly just reading this book on massages, and she said, "Oh, you'd be really great. And why don't you just come to us and Jeffrey? He's a great guy, and then we'll help you and we'll set you up." And she goes, "Really?" She goes, "Yeah." And then Donald Trump, the only time he's talked in any way, shape, or form about the victims was a couple of weeks ago when he was asked, "Well, what was the falling out between you and Jeffrey Epstein?" He goes, when he was asked again after his trip from Europe, he said, "He stole property from me." And the property that he was referring to was a 6-year-old girl, Virginia Giuffre, who later, and if I think I'm quoting her exactly verbatim, Vicky, and when she pointed the finger to Prince Andrews and these other powerful men, including Jeffrey Epstein, she goes, "I was passed around like a platter of fruit." To these powerful men. And this woman, naturally, if you can imagine that happening to you, died allegedly by suicide in April. And so just the way that Maxwell and the way that Trump talk about Virginia Giuffre, Vicky, it's infuriating. And it just shows a window into how they look at women and girls.
That's what's interesting about it is the window into the mentality. That is what I found so illuminating. The complete entitlement, the arrogance, the snobbery. You know, at one point, I think, she said to Todd Blanche, "Well, I'm so square. Jeff, I had to go and find new masseuses all the time for Jeffrey Epstein because he liked to change it up. But, I like to keep the same, once I find somebody I like, I keep them," as if we're talking about a stately home in England and not these absolutely horrendous sex crimes. I mean, I'll be very curious to see. I think Virginia Roberts' family, right, is going to speak. Are they speaking next week? Because I'm sure that they listened to this and were completely outraged. By the way, and Ghislaine Maxwell, the other thing that she did, she completely denied having gone to Mar-a-Lago and recruited Virginia Roberts. Well, I'm pretty sure, because I sat through her criminal trial, that is absolutely concretely documented.
Yeah.
Um,
Yep. And the
that she did
president
that.
mentioned it. Trump mentioned it.
Yeah,
He said,
yeah, exactly. The one thing that she said that, and I'm speculating now, but the one thing she said that I thought could be true, and I found interesting, was that Epstein and she sort of fell out, and that Epstein was annoyed with her for calling Virginia Giuffre, a liar. Because
mm,
when she did that, she brought Ghislaine Maxwell. I mean, that was the moment where they began this massive civil litigation battle, which ended up getting settled. But it was everything that was in that case was the backbone then for the criminal charges against Epstein. And then when he died, against Ghislaine Maxwell. And that I believed, because everything we know about Jeffrey Epstein is he would use money and legal connections. He wanted all this stuff to go away. He didn't want all this stuff in the public eye. So I actually do believe that he was probably very ticked at Ghislaine Maxwell for choosing to fight Virginia Giuffre on that. I do believe that. And Alan Dershowitz has said in the past that Jeffrey Epstein offered, he wanted to go around paying guys, he wanted to settle that, if they had been named by any of the victims, he would rather pay their legal fees and have the whole thing go away. And obviously that isn't what happened here.
and another thing that she mentioned, which was interesting that grabbed the headlines, is she didn't think Jeffrey killed himself. Why do you think she slipped that in?
Oh, because she's very smart. One, it keeps her relevant. Okay, I mean it's that's clickbait. Now it keeps, and anything that keeps her in the headlines is probably good for her at this point. She needs to matter in order for Trump to consider pardoning her. He needs to think that she's a person of importance to him politically, and I'm sure, again, the arrogant tone, the framing of that whole interview is sort of disbelief. I mean, she talks about the fact she was stunned when she was arrested, couldn't believe why the government would have any interest in her. So I think it tracks that she probably thought, well, why would Jeffrey Epstein kill himself? I mean, you could see she was struggling with the idea that he was really guilty of anything. I mean, the way she put it, he was a man who took testosterone and grew and got a little bit unwell. Was the way her framing of all of this. And again, where was Todd Blanche with his questions? I mean, it was pathetic.
Well, it should have been Maureen Comey, but Maureen Comey, the prosecutor, was fired, folks. And the question is, why was she fired? And like Vicky said, where was Todd Blanche with his questions? Well, Todd Blanche shouldn't have been there, because Todd Blanche, before he became the deputy attorney general, was Donald Trump's personal attorney. So just to keep the timeline fresh, Wall Street Journal publishes that bombshell article that says that Ghislaine Maxwell had compiled a birthday book for Jeffrey Epstein's 50th birthday, getting, personal notes from very famous people, including Donald Trump. Donald Trump was really pissed off, spends the entire day trying to convince the Wall Street Journal editor not to publish the story. She publishes the story. He threatens to sue. He does sue. Wall Street Journal says, go ahead and sue. We stand by our story. And then another article drops where they list names and Donald Trump, and specifically, they say they have actually the goods. And then another story drops where they say that the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, had actually told Donald Trump in May that he's all up in the files, which means, folks, when he was asked about it, I believe in next month by ABC News, he lied. He openly lied to the American public when he was asked, like, are you in the files? He goes, oh, no, Pam's doing a fantastic work, and no, I'm not in it. So number one, he's lying. Number two, what we've been witnessing for this whole summer is a cover up. Number three, Comey gets fired. Todd Blanche goes there, Vicky. They talk for 2 days. You just talked about the transcript for the people who are joining us late. And then less than a week later, she gets this cushy transfer, another sweetheart deal that no one has ever seen before. The only time anyone's ever seen such a sweetheart deal for a pedophile like this was 2008 for Jeffrey Epstein. And now she's sitting there in a minimum security camp in Texas. She has been cleared for work release. It doesn't mean she's applied for it, but she's cleared. So her status right now, folks, a woman who was serving a 20-year sentence, who was convicted of, sex crimes, she's cleared for work release. And I want to ask you, Michael Wolff told me, well, and thank you so much for connecting us. That was due to Vicky. She connected me with Michael. That interview's up. I said, well, how could they get this information? And she says they could get that information, specifically Wall Street Journal, through Ghislaine Maxwell, which, Ghislaine Maxwell is probably the one who had the book. And the only way, he was kind of saying it without saying it, the Wall Street Journal got it was Ghislaine Maxwell provided it.
Well, she even said, Roger, in the transcripts with Todd Blanche, she says she'd seen some of the documentation when she was preparing for trial. She'd seen it in her discovery. She said that, and then she had again this case of selective amnesia. When asked, "Well, do you remember having anything to do with Trump's submission to the birthday?" But no. But definitely that came out of legal discovery. I mean, the Wall Street Journal has been really, really good in terms of their reporting on this. I mean, they have all the way through, whether it's the court cases involving Jess Staley, the former JP Morgan banker who, was in long-term communication and emails with Jeffrey Epstein, and ended up having to step down from running Barclays Bank, whether it was the lawsuits around the Virgin Islands and JP Morgan or Deutsche Bank. The Wall Street Journal somebody has been leaking to them.
Yep.
A lot of documents. And I'm sure that the birthday book was part of Ghislaine Maxwell's legal discovery, and somebody handed that over to them. So that makes I'm sure Michael's right on that.
And, it seems like she has the goods because, Vicky, and of course, this is now speculation, but we have to trust the evidence of our eyes. Again, it is not normal for someone like Ghislaine Maxwell, who was just essentially beginning to serve for 20-year sentence in Florida, to get a sweetheart deal. No one knows why she was given this sweetheart deal. Literally, there's no normal explanation for this. And the fact that it came right after Todd Blanche spoke to her for 2 days, and the transcripts, Vicky did a Cliff Notes version of it, but she's going to have it up on her Substack, a lengthy analysis. Once this this interview is finished, I'll have it up later tonight and link to Vicky's Substack that you should all subscribe to. I mean, to me, Vicky, this is quid pro quo. Like, nothing else makes sense. What's your take on this?
Well, I think it's definitely a quid pro quo. I think it's a very alarming possible harbinger of what might yet be to come. I mean, I don't think politically Trump could afford to commute a sentence now, or pardon her, but send her to England, or to France. She has a French passport, but further down the road, we know that Trump will do whatever he wants, to do. So I think it's really, really alarming. It's obviously makes a mockery of the US justice system. And I only hope that next week, when the victims get to go before Congress, they deliver such a knockout punch that it stops these people in their tracks. I will say
that's Ro Khanna and real quick, Vicky. That's Ro Khanna and Thomas Massey. That bipartisan effort. I had Ro Khanna on last week. He had as of last week, Vicky. He said he had at least 10 survivors, rape survivors, who are going to join him and Thomas Massey at the Capitol on September 3rd. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No. I mean, I will say this. I do think that the thing that I was I mean, not particularly surprised, but I think that probably the Trump people will have been, not pleased about. Well, she did it. She definitely went out of her way to fulsomely praise President Trump and say he had been nowhere near anything illicit as far as she knew. But she also went out of her way to clear Bill Clinton.
Yep, I was going to ask you about that.
And I would have thought that the Trump people that was less helpful to them, actually, because I think you and I may have talked about this before. Politically speaking, Trump's only way out of this, I think, is to find a scapegoat. And the question is, who is that going to be?
You and I have talked about it, and we were speculating that the quid pro quo would be Ghislaine Maxwell would offer up a Bill Clinton, a Bill Richardson, and a Bill Gates. But what was really interesting, folks who haven't followed the transcripts, is that she cleared not only Donald Trump, but she also went out of her way to clear Bill Clinton. What do you think that's all about?
Well, I think that I've spent over 20 years, unfortunately, reporting on this. There's never been any evidence, and nobody has ever said. Virginia Roberts once talked about Bill Clinton, and then she retracted it and said she'd been mistaken. And there's never been any evidence or any allegation that Bill Clinton went to Jeffrey Epstein's island. And the problem in this story is that it's so nasty, and there are so many people involved, and lots of people did go on people's planes, that it's easy to conflate one thing with something else. But I'm not surprised that she did clear Bill Clinton because is it you or me who's freezing? Because there's just no evidence to suggest that Bill Clinton ever went to Jeffrey Epstein's island, and yet that is something that gets talked about as if it were fact, and it's just not true.
But she also cleared, most importantly, Donald Trump. And what's your take on that? That Donald Trump she said she never saw Donald Trump do anything. Just anything bad. And when I was talking to Michael Wolff, and I've talked to you before, I said, okay, Michael, take us through the timeline. They've known each other since the late 80s. Michael said that Donald and Epstein used to party together in the 90s. And specifically, their main goal was to go after models. And the reason was, in the 90s, getting models was seen as the major accomplishment. That was like, you were the man. And I said, well, what were the age of these models? And Michael said 14 to 20. And then we realized, of course, that Epstein had a modeling agency, and briefly Donald Trump had a modeling agency, and Donald Trump had taken over Miss Universe, which has Miss USA and Miss Teen USA. And then allegations of Donald Trump as a grown man going into the dressing room of the Miss Teen USA, and those women saying, well, those girls saying, we found it very creepy. And the fact that Donald Trump has sexualized his own daughter many times, and the fact that Donald Trump used to point at girls ages 12 and saying, in 10 years, I'll be dating her. And the fact that he's had 24 credible accusations of sexual assault. He's been held liable for sexually assaulting E. Jean Carroll, and on and on and on. So her saying that she never saw Donald Trump do anything with Jeffrey Epstein. And by the way, in 2002, I believe it was 2002, where when we have the audio clip where he said, oh, Jeffrey Epstein, fantastic, terrific guy. He likes girls. I heard he likes them a bit young, though. It defies credibility to me, Vicky, that Trump had no idea.
I told Joy Reid, you just had on yesterday, that, Paolo Zampoli, who is now in Trump's administration, he's the UN ambassador for something. He owned a modeling agency. He was the person who introduced Donald Trump to Melania. Melania was part of Paolo's modeling agency, and Paolo Zampoli's biggest client back then was Leslie Wexner, because Leslie Wexner owned Victoria's Secret. So, yes, this is all wheels within wheels. But watch. Again, going back to how Ghislaine Maxwell reframed the narrative in those transcripts, she didn't talk about any of that. She talked about knowing meeting Trump with her father, when her father was somebody who Donald Trump would have really wanted to suck up to, because Robert Maxwell owned the New York Daily News. And, and Trump has always had a hotline into page 6 at the New York Post, that made it, when he was a New York real estate developer, it was a huge part of his branding effort, was knowing all the journalists. And definitely he would, and so Maxwell was a man, and Ghislaine was very clever. She talked about how close Robert Maxwell, her father, had been to Ivana Trump. We were in a different time warp from, the Melania and all of that, because Ivana and Robert Maxwell both were born in Czechoslovakia. And then when I thought it was very clever when she said, and I always thought of Donald Trump as a gentleman. When you say gentleman in a plummy British upper class accent, it's quite effective. Again, we're back to Downton Abbey. So Trump will have loved that. And it was taking the narrative away from all the tawdry models and all the stuff you just talked about, which is, of course, was the real basis of Trump's friendship with Jeffrey Epstein, and casting the story as something completely else altogether. Different wife. This was about power and gentility, and
It's so, I mean, if you really step back, it's so infuriating that it becomes laughable. Laughable not because it's funny, but laughable because as the human emotion, that's all that you have left with, that it's so absurd that in order to have some catharsis, you have to just laugh at it, because otherwise it's overwhelming that this has been happening since the 90s. He's a terrible person. He's parted with Epstein. It's all out there. We have his rhetoric. We have his trips. We have videos. We have photos. We have audio. We have Jeffrey Epstein saying he was Donald Trump's closest friend. We have the victims, thanks to you and others. The victims were always suppressed because Jeffrey Epstein pressured, like I said, folks, so the 2,500 people joining us, Vicky, more than 2 decades ago, was about to break the story because the Farmer sisters, who were victims, on the record went to Vicky. Vicky was pregnant with twins at the time, included it in what was supposed to be this initial puff piece on Jeffrey Epstein, but it ended, thanks in Vicky's hands, it became a substantive piece about how this guy's
but minus the farmers.
Because the Vanity Fair, the editor of Vanity Fair, Graydon Carter, was threatened, and then at the last second, Vicky tell him what happened. You thought the Farmer sister was like, "Yay, the expose," and then you were pregnant and you got the magazine.
When I saw the Running for Daddy and they were taken out of it, and I was beside myself because they were on the record, and Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell knew what they had alleged, and so, the way you protect people who come forward and make those kind of allegations is by printing the allegations. If you don't print the allegations, it puts them in a horrendous position. And I was told, oh, it's better as a business story. It was absurd. I mean, years later, Graydon Carter changed his tune and said, oh, it's because I was a terrible reporter and we didn't have the reporting. We did have the reporting. We had many people backing up what the farmers had said contemporaneously. We absolutely did. This was a deliberate editorial decision, and it was unfathomable. But I have printed before on my Substack, and I can reprint it again. Because Jeffrey Epstein threatened me when I was reporting this piece, the lawyers told me to start recording him. We don't normally do that, but we didn't. This was back at a moment of time when nobody knew who this guy was, and we didn't know he could be very dangerous. We knew nothing, and there he was making all these threats to me, and then he would say, "And by the way, that's off the record," and we didn't know what to do with this, and so. I had this transcript of Ghislaine Maxwell, of this deeply unpleasant conversation that I had with her, where I went and said, Annie Farmer tells me that when she was 16 years old, you know, she went down to Jeffrey Epstein's ranch in New Mexico, but you were supposed to be chaperoning her, and you gave her this topless massage that she felt really uncomfortable, and she thinks that Jeffrey Epstein was watching. Well, I mean, the way Ghislaine Maxwell spoke back to me in that conversation, which, I have the transcript, how could you possibly believe this young girl? Of course, I don't have time to go around giving people massages, everybody, again, it was this arrogance, this such entitlement. And how could I possibly believe somebody I didn't know 6 months previously over her? And it's the exact same entitlement that I heard again in that conversation with Todd Blanche. So it gave me the shivers.
Yeah, Vicky's been through it, folks, and her reporting has been excellent. I'm going to link to her Substack. Vicky, a final question before I let you go, and folks, stick around. I'll be back at 1:00 with the Utah Overpass folks, and specifically the people who are doing the national protests against Donald Trump and how they're mobilizing folks. It's really fantastic. I have 2 speakers coming out in about 5 and 6 minutes. Because who rests, Vicky? But before I let you go, I'm just a masochist. Before I let you go, uh, we have these 10 victims joining Ro Khanna and Thomas Massey on September 3rd. We have Ron Wyden saying he has to follow the money trail. You're an investigative reporter, but you're just one woman. There's one guy. If you had the money, if you had the investigators, if you had the team, if you had the resources, what's a trail that you think, Democrats should follow?
I think they should. I mean, again, they have to get the majority in the houses, but the people who have answers: Alex Acosta, Leon Black, Leslie Wexner, George Mitchell. I mean, but all the names that need to come and explain who this guy was, what they remember about Ghislaine Maxwell's role in this. That's where all the, some of the people that Ghislaine Maxwell did mention, the estate of Elizabeth Johnson, anybody who entrusted their money and their life to Jeffrey Epstein, please come and explain why you did that and what happened.
And they're alive, folks. Alex Acosta, like someone just said, Gianna works at Newsmax. Leslie Wexner, still alive. Leslie, why did you give your $77 million townhouse to Epstein for $1? Why did you give him power of attorney? I think these are very important questions. You follow the money, you'll get a lot more answers. And as Vicky said, you see how this web is very tight, but it can be unentangled, folks. It can be unentangled. You just have to have the right people ask the right questions. Vicky is one of them. She's been on it for 2 decades. Vicky, shamelessly promote yourself. Don't be British.
Well, everyone, please go continue to buy the Idaho 4. It's still week 6. It's number 3 on the New York Times nonfiction list. Please, Vicky Ward Investigates on Substack. And if you're interested in this, go to Audible and download Chasing Ghislaine, the podcast series about all of this. Because it's the most in-depth reporting that has been done on the men and the money around Jeffrey Epstein.
And again, Vicky was there every day at Ghislaine's trial, and so that's the Audible series. Also, Vicky, you said you're going to have your own write-up on the transcripts out tomorrow, correct?
I hope, yes. In the next, yes, I'm nearly done. Yes, in the next 24 hours. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna just let me know, and I'll update the piece once it's out to link to it. For the 2,500 people who joined us, I'm talking to Vicky Ward. Vicky Ward has been on the Epstein story for 2 decades. While she was pregnant, she wrote a piece with the Farmer Sisters, who came on the record exposing Epstein as a pedophile. That piece was spiked by Vanity Fair because of Epstein's threats. So Vicky's been on top of it, and again, she did the audiobook called Chasing Glenn, and she has a new best-selling book that's been on the bestsellers list for 6 weeks, The Idaho Four, another real-life tragedy of a radicalized man, an incel. It's horrifying, but very topical. I strongly recommend people read it, and we've talked about it before on The Left Hook. Folks, this has been The Left Hook. No paywalls, because I'm a terrible capitalist. Everything's for free. If you have a couple of bucks, give it to Vicky. If you have a few bucks after that, give it to me, because I have a bunch of kids. And I'll be back in about a minute and a half with the Overpass team, this fantastic group of activists who are now in 50 states, bringing up the numbers. And if you drive, I see in Virginia on the 395, once a week, like, it's been growing. First it was 2 people, now 10 people, not 30 people, not 50 people, with these big signs just mocking and ridiculing Donald Trump and calling out his fascist agenda. So they're growing, folks, and I strongly recommend listening to them in about a minute and a half. Vicky, thank you so much for taking the
Thanks so
time.
much, Wajahat. Bye.
Bye.